So it's my pleasure to introduce Lane, and she is someone that I've gotten to know over the past few months since she moved out here from New York, and it's really been a pleasure getting to know her. She's someone I really look up to in this area of user experience. She's very accomplished, and I think you guys are in for a treat. So I'm just going to hand it right off to Lane.
Thank you. So thank you, Joe. Thank you, Pete. And I just wanted to say thank you all for signing up early and getting seats. There were a lot of people on the wait list who didn't get in. So thank you all for coming to activities. So my name is Lane Halley, and I'm here to talk to you tonight about lean user experience, a little talk I call Somewhere Over the Waterfall. So this is me. And in addition to Lean LA, you can also tweet or follow at LuxorCo, which is the Lean User Experience Residency. And we have a lot of interesting things to say about startups and Lean and user experience. And my website is lanehalley.com if you want to follow up with me later. So I want to talk just a little bit about what is Luxor. Luxor is actually a company that helps early stage entrepreneurs develop better products through using user experience methods. And in San Francisco and New York, we have a 10-week residency program where teams can come and spend 1 day a week with Luxor facilitators and guest speakers who help them learn how to do customer development and product ideation and prototyping and getting user feedback and doing all those other kind of user experience kinds of things that entrepreneurs don't typically get in business school or computer science school. So a little bit about my own background. I've been doing this user experience thing for quite a long time and in a lot of different settings. I have worked for large companies making package software. I have worked in-house as a design director for brokerage. And I also worked for many years at a very well-known interaction design firm in San Francisco called Cooper. Anybody here heard of Alan Cooper? The inmates are running the asylum. Yeah, I worked for that guy for about 10 years or so and helped found the methodologies he talks about in his books. So more recently, I really got the lean startup bug, and I work more with startups these days than with large enterprise companies. And the companies on the right are some of the companies that I work with through the Luxor program. So I just want to get a little bit of an idea of who's here in the audience tonight. So I like to do the hand game too. So put your hand up if you spend a lot of time writing code. And you can put your hand up more than one time, it's fine. Put your hand up if you spend a lot of time drawing on paper, like sketches. How about, okay, put your hand up. If you're out of hands, you can just kind of double up. Put your hand up if you spend a lot of time making plans or managing other details and projects and things like that. Okay. How about people who are testers, quality assurance, people like that? Okay. And then how about people who are visual designers, graphic designers, use graphic design tools, things like that? Cool, we've got a nice variety here tonight. So if you didn't put your hand up even once, what do you do? I know there's a woman here who makes really excellent hot sauce. But anybody else have something that they do that we didn't mention yet? Shout it out.
Sales.
Sales, okay, great. Okay, thank you. Talk to customers, sell the products. Thanks. All right, so supposedly you're all here to learn a little bit about lean user experience. And suddenly, lean UX has become a really hot topic. You'll find that there's conferences and a lot of people are talking about lean UX. Well, what is lean UX and how do I do it? So hopefully after we've been together for the next half hour or so, you'll know something about that. So anytime I'm going to talk about lean user experience, I have to kind of go back to the origin, to the headwaters, to the great waterfall from which we all came. Yes, waterfall. So back in the day, this is the way we used to build package software. We would have a planning phase, and after making MRDs and PRDs, which were usually very large and incomprehensible, they get dumped on the poor, unwilling, and stalwart technology team who would try to build these steaming piles of features. And then, if you had a little time left over, there'd be some testing happening, never enough. And whatever we learned was always too late because you couldn't change the code at that point. And then you'd ship it, and then you get the t-shirt. Now, some of you I know have been around the block a few times. How many of you have a box of t-shirts in the closet from products you have shipped? A few of us. I wish that I still had my Bob t-shirt, so I could be wearing my Bob t-shirt for you tonight. I let it go at a garage sale in Petaluma, California about, oh my goodness, 10 years ago. So the challenge with user experience is that the whole discipline of user experience has been trying to fit into this very linear, siloed, handoff way of working for most of my professional discipline. Two of the big disciplines that make up user experience, HCI, human-computer interface, and usability testing, really we're trying to fit into different parts of the process. So we've been trying for years and years and years to try to wedge a little time for research and design in the front part of the process, and then try to wedge a little more time in the back for usability testing. And I have to say, after years and years of trying, it didn't work. So suddenly, a lot of things changed in the industry that opened up a ray of sunshine and made a lot of new things possible. Back in the day, if you wanted to make a technology company, you had to spend a lot of money and build a data center. Now we have Heroku. It's relatively easy just to get something up and get it started without making that huge investment. New platforms and new frameworks make it easier and faster for people to build things. So technology is no longer the problem that it used to be. Things are still hard, but they don't take nearly as long and they don't require you to be nearly as committed to the ideas that you have. Agile development is really a given. At this point, many teams are practicing many variants of Agile in some form or another, whether they're doing Scrum, or they're doing small A Agile, it's a given. And web applications. I remember really vividly around the time of Friendster that suddenly everything was just sort of perpetually in beta. Like every logo on the web was just kind of in beta all the time. And at the beginning I was kind of offended by it because I felt like they were just being sloppy. But then I pretty quickly realized that it was the ability to continually deploy, and continually change, and continually revise software that was creating new opportunities to not have to get it right the first time, to figure it out as we do it. So web analytics has changed the way we learn about our users, and mobile devices have really changed the experiences that we deliver to people and created expectations that we can make smaller, lighter, more single-purpose applications for people's use. So, I'm going to stand closer for my clicker to work. So now, more than ever, it's really important that we're making products that people want. Ideas are plentiful. For every startup idea someone pitches to me, I have to kind of smile and nod because I probably heard it 2 or 3 times. It isn't the ideas that you have, it's how well you execute on the ideas and how much you can engage with a passionate group of users relatively quickly. The barriers to technology are lower than they've ever been. If you make something and you put it out there, someone else can scoop it with the same features relatively quickly. And how many people have an application on their smartphone that they bought and looked at and went, eh, and switched to something else? I mean, it happens all the time. The barrier to switching is lower than ever. The days of multi-$100 seat licenses just really aren't the way it used to be, with stores making it possible to just buy and download applications. So, I'm going to have to switch over to this side, I'm sorry. So, when I talk about lean user experience, something that I often confront is that people think of design as being just the bits, just the pixels, making it pretty. A lot of times people walk up to me and they'll say, hi, I need a designer to make my interface look good. And I'm like, great, I can help you make your interface look good, but we have to do some other things first. We have to make sure it's doing the right things before we can make it look good. So when I'm talking about lean user experience, I'm really talking about an entire stack. So it all starts with users. And we can get fancy and we can say there's users and there's customers, but for the time being, let's just talk about users as being the people who are actually making use of the thing that you're putting in front of them. And then those users have needs. And this might seem kind of obvious, but there's a subtlety to it. So let's just think for a moment that we're making a software product for home video editing. Great, home video editing. That seems pretty straightforward. Well, one kind of user is parents. And parents take video of what? And they're motivated to take video of their kids because? Memories, right. So let's think of another group of people who take a lot of video. Skateboarders. Skateboarders take a lot of video. They're motivated to take video because? Because it's cool, because they want to put it on YouTube, right. So think about it for a second. We set out to make some home video editing software, but already we have a lot of features to consider. How do we figure out what goes in the product and how we make it look and behave? So this is where you get to insert the direction from your business. Are you about family memories, or are you about shredding skateboard videos? Interesting question. You can really come up with very different products, and all down the cascade, you'll find you're making very different decisions based on the business direction. Oh, just I should mention, all these slides are already up on SlideShare if anybody wants to be following along. Okay, so out of that then comes uses. And if you think about parents with young children, a use they might want to, something you might want to use your software for would be to make a memory album or to make a short snippet of video that they could share with their relatives. Right? Those are uses that come out of the needs. Then the features come out of that. So a lot of times when people are talking about the product features, they're just coming up with a lot of ideas for things that they can be putting in the product. But without considering the context of the uses and the needs and the users, it can become very muddy and it becomes very difficult to understand what you need to do and how it all fits together. So this is where coming up with some kind of making it real becomes very useful. This is where sketches and wireframes and prototypes helps you start to see how it all can fit together. And then, for those of you who are Agilists, user stories fit here. User stories happen here. So when I'm talking about lean user experience, I'm talking about what are the methods and approaches that we use to make sure that we understand and are acting intelligently on information about our users all the way down the stack. So just to sort of note, everything above the line is about people, and everything below the line is about product. So understanding people is just a really critical underlying aspect of user experience. So now it kind of comes to who is making these product decisions. So in your company, everybody who's making a decision about how a feature is going to look and behave, whether a feature is going in the product or not, they're a designer, sorry. Everybody in your company who's making a product decision is making a design decision. And I like to say, your product is going to have a user experience, whether you plan it or not. You might as well make it an intentional act. So how can we do that? I'm really excited to see what's happening with the advent of lean startup. I first heard of this book back in about 2008 when a very dear friend of mine, William Petrie, handed me a copy and said, read this book. And I kind of looked at it and I read, well, first of all, I have to ask the group, how many people own this book? Okay, leave your hand up if you've read the first third. Leave your hand up if you've read past middle. Leave your hand up if you've read the whole thing. Wow. I really admire anybody who was able to figure out lean startup by reading this book. My hat is off to you. It was dense going, but I found myself as I was reading it just being kind of bewildered. It's like this guy has this thing called customer development, but has he never heard of user experience? Has he never heard that there's an entire discipline that tells people how to go out and have conversations with users and understand what their needs are and turn that into products? It's like, wow, these guys, I should go get together with them. So this concept of getting out of the building, this is my favorite quote about it. It's from Steve Blank's website, not from the book. Customer development is the process of how you get out of the building and search for the model. Customer development is designed so that you, the founders, gather first-hand experience about the customer and market needs. Now, this is actually a revolutionary statement. I think a lot of people don't realize how revolutionary this is, because I have heard So many business people and so many founders tell me, I need to hire someone to go talk to my users so I can focus on the more important activities like raising money. If you're an entrepreneur, there is nothing more important that you could be doing with your time than spending time with the people who use your product. I don't understand that. So it makes me very happy to see that the people in the lean startup community are really beginning to understand this and really beginning to get it at a really fundamental level that you need to get out of the building. So I'm kind of sorry Patrick isn't here tonight. He often is. But there's another book that is kind of the next in the series. Patrick Laskovitz and Brett Cooper wrote a very much more digestible and more proceduralized version of Steve Blank's book. How many people have a copy of this book? Ooh. Yay, you have one in the room even. That's awesome.
Patrick's not here tonight because he's writing his second book.
Patrick's not here tonight because he's writing his
Seriously?
second book, which we are all eagerly looking forward to. So, you know, in their delightful and charming way, they boil it down to even be more simple, which is go speak in person if possible with living, breathing customers, no dead customers, to determine the validity of your assumptions. And this introduces that second concept, which is, you know, any idea that you have is just an idea until it's been proven by people buying and loving and recommending your product. What a revolutionary concept that is. You have to get out of the building, talk to users, and recognize that an idea you have is just an idea. What a great idea. So in this book, there is the customer discovery process broken down into 8 steps. And I only bring this up just to point out that UX has a lot to say about how you do all of these activities. And there are libraries of books that you can read to learn how to do these things, and lots of people in the UX community who are ready and eager to join in to your startups and help you do these things. So now takes us to the most recent installment in the journey, The Lean Startup by Eric Ries. And it's really wonderful to see this book acquire so much credence in the business community and seeing it on so many desks. And sort of my pocket summary of what Eric has done is he's combined 3 aspects: the concept of customer development from Steve Blank, the idea of short cycles and iterative development from my favorite flavor of Agile, which is XP, and the idea of reducing risk, which is the lean aspect of lean startup, and that comes from Toyota manufacturing. So when you apply this concept to design and user experience, it really becomes an issue of reducing risk around your product assumptions. So think of it this way. So as a designer, I have a really great idea for a really awesome homepage. And then, 3 months later, we ship it and it didn't work. Well, all of the time between here and here is waste. What if we could push the period of time between having the idea and validating the idea to a smaller and smaller increment? So the idea is, instead of acquiring risk that's dead, you can take smaller risks and validate them along the way. Pretty straightforward concept. So the other thing I wanted to mention about Lean Startup is that it really is founded on this idea of building, measuring, and learning. And Lean Startup practitioners, we like to sort of put the think at the top and say think, make, check. But once you're on the circle, you're on the wheel and you're moving around. So, hooray! UX has a seat at the table. How many people here would consider themselves in the discipline of user experience in some way or another? Yeah, it's been a long time coming. It's been a long time coming until we have an opportunity to participate in development and business activities. But more and more, we're being asked to step up and own this. However, we're really rooted in these old waterfall ways of working, and we have to adapt our methods. How can we do that? This is a really great diagram from a guy named Dan Saffer that describes the disciplines of user experience. And how many people here have tried to hire a user experience designer recently? Is it easy?
No.
Why?
They don't get it. I don't get it.
You don't get it.
They're hard to find.
They're hard to find. And they're not the same. Everybody seems to have these different skill sets. It's a very broad and specialized discipline. So Dan drew this diagram. This is his second version of it. I think there's even a more complicated version. But user experience design is kind of like a great big container in which there's lots of other disciplines, including information architecture, visual design, interaction design, human-computer interaction, content creation, industrial design, architecture. Hanging off the side is mechanical engineering, electrical engineering. So it's a huge and vast discipline. And to top that off, the way that UX is practiced in different environments is a different thing. So this is sort of my quadrant for the way I see the UX practices being delivered in the space. On one hand, you have design being delivered from inside the team and in a startup or an enterprise. So for example, in enterprise inside the team, design can be served by having a design specialist who's actually on the Agile team doing interface development and things like that. From a startup perspective, very often what I see is a thing I call consensus design, where the team doesn't really have anybody on the team with any sort of specialization or training in UX, but they're trying to learn and they're doing as best they can. Some startups go the other way and they have an advisor or they use an external resource in a design agency. And in enterprise, you see the same thing happening, where you have a centralized research or usability department that's bringing in the expertise to the company. So if you sort of put these two things together, if UX people have a bunch of different highly specialized skill sets and they may have only worked at an agency or externally to a department, it's really hard to find somebody to come and join a startup who's going to be comfortable working in that environment. So that's why I feel so passionate about trying to reach out to the UX community and talk to them and try to help them learn to manipulate their methods so that we can work in a more lean startup kind of way. So another challenge is the challenge of incremental delivery. I think many people who are designers have kind of grown accustomed to having a lot of time to research, a lot of time to think, a lot of time to bounce things off the wall, let it percolate, and then make a big deliverable and show it to somebody. Well, Agile development has really required us to figure out how to break up the ideas into a backlog and deliver them continuously into potentially shippable product increments. Holy cow, how are we going to do that now? So this is a big challenge that we're facing. The whole UX discipline has come up against a situation where there aren't enough designers to go around. The economic downturn of a couple of years ago left us with a big hole of designers, kind of mid-career, 3-4 year designers. There are many kinds of designers. An information architect doesn't necessarily have the same skill set as a web designer, doesn't necessarily have the same skill set as a user research, doesn't necessarily have the same skill set as, so it can be very complicated to find somebody who can really work on your project. Design can be very expensive to outsource, and then if you're not building an ongoing relationship, that expertise goes right out the door. Many designers who have worked with agencies are very comfortable and used to working in silos and creating a lot of deliverables and a lot of handoffs, and it can be challenging and a little threatening to learn to break open their practice to work in a new way. And just in general, I think that user experience has created an overemphasis on deliverables, where sometimes we think that the outcome of our work is to produce a deliverable and not to produce a product. So I really want to see us create an environment where designers and developers and business people and other people who participate in the making of software can all work together collaboratively using these techniques to contribute to building better products, and waste less of our energy on creating big, thick books that nobody will ever read. So what is lean UX anyhow? This is a definition that is created by Janice Frazier, who is the founder of my company Luxor. And Janice says, lean user experience is a principle-driven process for teams working in situations of extreme uncertainty, which is pretty much any team I've ever worked on. It's characterized by rituals that predispose predictable, high-quality, high-velocity user experience outcomes. Now that's very high-spirited, but really what it breaks down to is just 10 simple steps, and I'll go over these briefly. So the first principle of lean UX really talks about who is involved. I feel passionately that user experience decisions need to be made by a cross-functional team. And at the table, there needs to be people who are responsible for business decisions, and product decisions, and development decisions, and design. It all fits together. You can't really make any kind of decision in a vacuum. The second cluster, like 2 through 4, talk about how we work together. And it's kind of unusual for people to get used to this, but once you get the hang of it, it makes a tremendous difference in your ability to have good ideas and have a shared vision. So the first is learning to externalize. A fault that I often see in teams is they'll spend a lot of time sitting around a table talking and talking and talking, and nobody's writing anything down, nobody's making any pictures, and they walk out of the room saying, okay, all right, and then they complain that they don't have a shared vision. Well, it's because they're not going through the necessary effort to make their thinking external. When you externalize your thoughts, it has a very powerful effect on creating something that's outside of you that people can react to and agree with or disagree with in an egoless way. It no longer becomes about what I think and what you think, but we're both discussing an idea which is external to us. Very powerful technique. Another way that we work together is we want to get into this flow, this lean startup flow of thinking and making and checking, thinking and making and checking in little cycles in order to reduce risk. And we want our process to be repeatable and routinized. Something that's really important aspect of Agile development is that Agile teams take in their own practices that work for them, and they grow and acquire new ways of working over time. So for example, how many people here are familiar with some of the Agile rituals like stand-ups and retrospectives and backlogs and things like that? In the same way, you need to create very similar practices such as talking to users in a continuous way, and visual thinking, and other things like that. They can become practices that your whole team engages in. And I'll give some examples of that a little later. The next cluster is about what we do. And in order to do lean UX, we want to be sure we're going to solve the right problem by being goal-driven, meaning user goal-driven, and outcome-focused. And the outcome is what's the business metric that we're trying to create? What is the key performance indicator, or KPI, that we will use as a measurement to let us know that our design is having the right effect? We will generate many options as a group. We'll generate many options externally. And then we'll decide quickly and yet hold those decisions lightly. And this is another thing that I see really trips up lean startup teams. I see teams just arguing, and not just getting stuck. When sometimes all it takes is to say, all right, stop. What's the smallest thing that we can do to validate which one of us is right? Can we make something? Can we do an A/B test? Can we mock up something and show it to some people? How can we gather some evidence that's going to bring us out of this way of thinking, bring us out of arguing and get us moving forward? So the last 2 points are about how we are sure. And lean user experience works from hypotheses. The idea that we have a hypothesis about our user, which is called a persona. We have hypotheses about the value of our product. It's very similar to the problem-solution hypotheses that lean startup talks about. And at the foundation, we believe that users are the best source of inspiration and information. So when I'm talking about flow, I mean that there's many things that you can make. There's many kinds of checking, and there's many different things that you can use in a team to help drive this thinking process. A couple of examples I'll show later. So here's a hypothesis statement. I often use this in projects where I'm coaching teams. When we're starting out a new experiment, when we're creating a new group of features that we're going to deliver, we'll actually create a persona, which I'll show you in a moment, and we'll actually write this down on a piece of paper and put it up on the wall. We believe that people like Mary, who's an example of the persona of a parent for the video editing tool we were talking about, has a need for sharing the memories of her child with her family. We know we will have succeeded when Mary is a regular user of the site and paying a monthly subscription fee. So that, if you can sort of see, relates very closely to this idea of a minimum viable product or an experiment in the lean startup sense. So just to kind of boil it down, if the 10 lean user experience principles are a little bit heavy, just think about these 4 things. What can I do to make my user experience practice more quick, more visual, more collaborative, and more continuous? And this is the call and response period. I love to let people repeat this. So quick, visual, collaborative, and continuous. Right. So just remember these 4 things. If you can do these 4 things, we're going to be going a long way towards figuring out how to fit user experience into lean startup. So here are a couple of examples. These are work from teams that I work with on a regular basis. And I'd like to show you how we've taken some things that typically in user experience have been kind of long, weighty, deliverable-focused processes and make them lighter and more visual. So the first practice is continuous customer engagement. I like to say it shouldn't be a special occasion to go talk to your users. And there are a lot of ways to do this. Some companies, like, how many people have heard of the Ladders? The Ladders, it's a job site for people seeking $100,000 jobs and up. They do a thing they call 3 users every Thursday. They recruit and bring in at least 3 users into the building every Thursday. And they show them the product. And sometimes they have a plan that they've worked out like a day or 2 before. Oh, we're going to show them this part of the product. But it's regular, it's routinized. It isn't a special occasion. And it's a requirement that developers observe some number of these sessions as a part of their review goals. So it changes the culture of the company because people are no longer, I ran into a term the other day I love, it's called the Malkovich bias. Anybody knows the movie Being John Malkovich? Basically the Malkovich bias is everybody assumes that they are the user of the product. Everybody assumes that everyone else uses the product the same way they would use it. Well, the perfect antidote to the Malkovich bias is to talk to users frequently, because then you realize that they're not like you. They're very different. And then the team has actual evidence that they can discuss. This is a picture of Lean Startup Machine and a company called Snap School, which won Lean Startup Machine and is now up at Dogpatch in New York. And they're good friends of mine. So kind of a shout out to Snap School. How many people in the room have made a persona at some point in your life? Personas? Yeah. So when I was at Cooper, we kind of preached an orthodoxy that personas were built on data. And you'd have to go out, you'd have to talk to a lot of people, collect a lot of data, and make your persona. And that somehow personas that you made up were kind of fake, kind of suspect. Well, now I'm finding that there's a way to use personas that you create as a very useful tool, because a persona is just an external artifact that declares your user hypothesis. So it can be tremendously helpful to start out with what does the team think the user is, and have everybody in the team write down, what do you think the user's like? What's some biographical data? What are their objectives? What do they value? Just think about them. And very quickly you'll realize a couple of things happen. Either, wow, you really had different ideas in your head about who the users are. That's okay. Maybe they're all users. Maybe some of them are more important than others. Sometimes something that happens is people realize, I don't really know what motivates my users, which is a terrific call to action to motivate people to go talk to users. So it's a win. I like showing this picture because there's an interesting story behind it. These personas were drawn by Jeff Patton, who's a good friend of mine. Jeff Patton is pretty well known in the field of Agile user experience, sort of bringing user experience and Agile together. And other than being pretty good at caricatures, I think that before we talked to users, well, this is an interesting project because we're making a tool for funeral home directors to manage obituary editing and posting to newspapers. And it's actually kind of annoying for them because they have to call the newspaper desks and fax things over, and it's actually a very interesting little hole in that. It's a problem ripe for solving with a web app. And before we did the user research, we really knew that we were going to have some kind of a persona for a funeral director and some kind of a persona for the next of kin, because that's a two-sided marketplace. You have the funeral director who's collecting the information and the next of kin who's providing it, and then you have the magazine or the newspaper that's publishing it. But after we talked to 4 or 5 people, we realized that there's actually another persona. There's a kind of person who reads obituaries. Isn't this interesting? So the idea is that people, especially people who've moved away from their hometown, like to subscribe to the paper from where they grew up. Because especially as their friends and family are getting older, they want to know who in their community is passed. They want to celebrate their lives. They want to be able to know how to behave appropriately and how to respond. So the product that we would have created would have been totally, totally different if we had never thought to talk to users first. So we discovered this whole completely underserved market just by talking to a handful of users. So that's kind of an interesting case study about personas as an evolving tool. Another thing I believe in very powerfully is team sketching. How many people feel like they can't draw? Oh, I'm sorry. Can you draw a square? You can draw a square, and a circle, and a triangle. You can make any interface I have ever seen if you can draw those basic shapes. But I think that successful teams kind of get over it. Everybody draws. And not everybody's the best drawer in the world, but over time, you really don't know who has the prettiest drawing, because sometimes it doesn't take a lot of drawing to communicate an idea. So I think team sketching is a really powerful practice, and I encourage it. Another practice that I encourage is the idea of just enough documentation. This is a story of a mobile app that I was designing with a team in Mountain View. We were making an iPad game, and we were under a pretty tight deadline. We were trying to ship a game to the Apple Store in less than a month, and none of us had ever made a mobile app before. We met our target. One of the things that really helped us was we didn't get tied up in making excessive and useful documentation. I did a lot of work with paper prototypes, and as you can see, I am not the best drawer in the world, but this was good enough. Just by having pieces that we can move around. But right now it's taped up on the wall, but each one of these sheets of paper represents a different screen in the interface, and then the moving pieces and other little overlays and things like that represent states. So these are scenario steps, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 is here. Because it's a tournament game, you're going back and forth through the interface at different states. You can take that off the wall and you can play the whole game on the piece of paper, on the stack of papers, with one person moving the parts and being the computer. And this was a tremendously powerful tool in getting the whole team on the same page about how's this thing gonna work? What's it gonna do? And it kind of got us over the hump where you're kind of in that zone in a greenfield project where you all kind of know what the product is going to be like, but you don't actually have these screens yet. And you could spend a lot of time creating specs and prototypes. Did you have a question?
How much time would you dedicate to drive that?
2 hours. I made that in 2 hours. Yeah, I have another, if you go to SlideShare, I have a deck right under this one called Nosy, and that's a whole case study on this project. And I did a couple things before I made the paper prototype that made it possible for me to do a paper prototype in 2 hours. On Lane Hallen. I got there early. I got my own name. So another practice that I really endorse is visual radiators. And this is a term from Agile. I think that it's extremely helpful for the team to surround yourself with things that remind you about the users and what their needs are. So this is a wall from the Luxor program, one of the teams. These are some sketches that were drawn by the people on the team. And I bet you can't tell who was the coder and who was the biz guy and who was the designer, because their pictures are just pictures, and they're using them to have conversations. And then over here, this is some user feedback sessions. This is a picture of somebody they talked to, and then they took their notes, one observation per sticky note, and they put it up on the wall. And this went all down the wall this way. There were about 5 or 6 of them. And different people did the interviews, and then afterwards, they all got together and they walked the wall, and they talked about what they'd learned. And this is very lightweight. You didn't have to go out and do weeks of research, and you didn't have to go out and write a big report. This is just very accessible. It's very lightweight, it's very visual, it's very collaborative. Another thing that I find very helpful is to think about how you organize your backlog. If you're an Agile practitioner and you are doing iteration planning, instead of picking a series of unrelated user stories, try thinking about developing a thin slice of the application through one use case, or what I call a happy path, of the user getting from one end to the other of accomplishing some quanta of value with your application. And in the early stages, like what's the thinnest, tiniest, ugliest thing that we can give that will still meet that value? And then in later tranches of your backlog, in slightly less definition, you have ideas about how you could enrich and enhance those capabilities. So this is a form of backlog management, and Jeff Patton is a guy that has done a lot of work in this field, and you can look him up, Agile Product Design, if you're interested in learning more about story mapping, which is what he calls the technique. Yes? Yes, exactly. And then another concept that I use in Luxor is the concept of a themed release, where we'll just name the next experiment after a particular user quote or problem. Like, Mary makes a memory album of her baby's first solid food, right? And then you can imagine that we'd only build out the features that are necessary to support that particular user need. So, I think that more and more we're finding ourselves in a world where to use more lightweight communication, to get away from deliverables, to get more shared understanding, cross-functional pairing is more and more necessary. So instead of having a designer making a big spec and then delivering that to the developer who works on it, and then talking again a week later to check it in about whether it meets the requirements, I see a lot of teams working from style guides. And how many people have heard about live style guides? There's some really, really interesting stuff going on right now. I encourage you to Google up live style guides. There's some good decks and things like that. But the idea is that just like in Agile, you want to write the test first and then build the code. The concept of a live style guide is you design the widget or component first, and you put it in the style guide, and then you put it in the interface. And you keep your naming of any sort of later Photoshop artifacts or things like that consistent with the naming of the components in your style guide. It's a brilliant idea. And I see more and more designers and developers sitting and working together at the sort of finer level of detail. So instead of writing a spec that has like pixel boundaries and color values and things like that, doing it in a more lightweight way, roughing it out in just a gray box or wireframed way, and then sitting together when it comes time to actually build it out, and then talking about it, doing it together. And I also really endorse designers developing greater facility with the materials that we work with. Don't be afraid of the HTML. Don't be afraid of the CSS. It can't hurt you. Even, I was at an Agile conference last weekend, and this really great concept came up. The idea was that we have a concept of when you are traveling in a foreign country, there's the idea of tourist Spanish, right? It's perfectly legitimate and comfortable to learn just enough Spanish to buy a bus ticket or order a cup of coffee. Well, why can't we have code literacy, like tourist code literacy, right? And I think that designers should be aiming, to find out where the bathroom is in HTML, It's just kind of like, it's important. If you want to build software, you should know something about how it's made. So that's the canned part of my talk. I wanted to leave some time just to have a conversation with you guys and just see what you guys are up against and how we can help. I'm going to check the time here. So it's just straight up 8. We started a little bit late. Let me ask Pete, how much time do we have for Q&A? It's straight up 8 now.
We got plenty of time.
Okay. So hit me. Start over here, then over here.
Any tips on talking to customers? Or do it more efficiently? It just seems like, you'll hear folks within the technology community suggesting that users don't really know what they want. So it seems as though my experience with, and also as a startup, you're sort of dealing with lean personnel, lean, short on time. And it seems like you can kind of, I have many conversations about our product, and I do glean things, but it influence our.
Can I summarize that into a question? What I hear you saying is, how do we talk to users and then make sense of what they tell us? Efficiently. Okay. I have a deck called "I'm out of the building, now what?" That's the big thing. The short, like the Cliff Notes version of this is, first of all, have an idea of what question you're trying to answer. Like you're building an experiment, your MVP, you have some questions that you need to get answered. Focus on those questions. Don't just, if you go out and have lots and lots of conversations with users, you'll hear a lot of things. Be very focused about what you're trying to learn first. Number two, this is the magic question. Whenever a user says, I'd like to have this feature, blah, 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 blah. Say, okay, if you had feature, blah, 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 what would it let you do? The next thing out of their mouth will be a goal, and you'll be able to then cross-reference many different users' features to a fewer, smaller set of goals, and then you'll be able to design and deliver product that meet the goals. So those are the two tidbits I have. Just know what you're going, focus on what you're trying to learn, share that with the team so that they're all having the same conversations, and when people talk about features, get them to go to goals. And then, purple shirt, Gabriel?
Yep.
Yes, go ahead.
So we're a 3-person team, and we all have cross-functional skills, but we've broken it down to customer development, product development, and engineering.
Okay.
So in collaborating, give us some ideas of tools of how best to collaborate to iterate quickly on the other side.
You have a team that's been broken into cust dev, product dev, and engineering.
Yeah.
And you want to know what tools for collaborating?
Yeah, and I'm not talking like apps or web tools.
Methods.
Methods.
Are you co-located?
We are not. Virtual.
Okay, virtual. Are you following any Agile framework like daily stand-ups and things like that?
We are.
Okay.
Sorry. That's,
all right, so...
Not all of us have the same terminology either. Right?
Okay, but you're talking to each other regularly?
Absolutely, and we're trying to do quarterly face-to-face now.
Okay, sketching, first of all. I think that I would recommend a technique called Design Studio, where you start with a problem and user that's well-defined, and then everybody individually ideates.
Including the developer?
Everybody. And then you show and tell, and then you talk about what are the best ideas. And I think that just as a core practice to get people who are not designers to start thinking about interface and interaction and usability and things like that, that's a really good place to start. And then the second technique I recommend for a team like yours is, since you have only part of your group doing customer development, take some time to have a group meeting about what do we wish we knew about customers, and then send them out like scouts to go get you that information. I'm going to move on to the next question and come back around. In the far back, please.
Yeah, so we're using Scrum, and I think the challenge that I've had is, how do you, because the design process could, go to a lot of feedback loops, how can you make it so that it fits within like a, let's say we do 1 week sprints, right? And we want to allocate levels of effort to it, but there could be a lot of feedback back and forth.
How do you fit user feedback into Scrum?
Right.
Okay.
With design.
Right, okay. It seems kind of difficult to do until you start shifting so that you're doing themed releases or experiments, because you can't test the whole product continuously all the time. You need to have a hypothesis about who's using the product, what are they trying to do, what's the business driver, and then you're testing for those things. It becomes a more manageable thing. Something I should mention before I forget is I'm teaching a workshop on March 17th, and I have some cards up here for a discount. So be sure you grab a card. It's a one-day workshop with a lot more detail about a lot of the questions that you guys are asking. Blue shirt, hand up.
Yeah, so you just talked about how designers should have basic code literacy. What about the other way around? I'm a developer and I need to have basic design literacy.
Hallelujah.
How do I, what are the hacks and resources that I should
Okay.
get there quickly?
Gosh, this is a blog post I've been meaning to write.
Can you repeat the question on Mike?
Yes, thank you for reminding me. I recommended code literacy for designers. Do I also recommend design literacy for coders? Yes, I do. And the next question is, what are those resources? And I think that the quickest thing to recommend is to go to the App Store. There is an application free from a school called Shillington, Shillington, and it's a design program that I'm a graduate of. I love the school. And they have a little free app that you can download that has like design basics. It has a little teeny module on topography, has a little teeny module on like hierarchy, composition, just talks about like kind of like the vocabulary of design. And if you take a look at that stuff, it'll get you started. And beyond that, don't be afraid of sketching. I think that if you just start sketching, that it really helps a lot. The app, I don't know what the app is called. Look up
Shillington Design.
Shillington Design?
Yeah.
Did you find it?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
Android as well.
Shilling.
I don't know if it's also Android. I only have an iPhone. I only know that. Yes, Steve?
Do you have an app of choice for sharing sketches?
Do I have an app of choice for sharing
Or
sketches?
online website? Or
So do you mean physical sketches, like pencil sketches?
Virtual, for teams that are not together.
Virtual teams. I don't have a method that I really love. I have used, does anybody heard of the Doxy? It's like a little USB scanner. Doxy. It's a little, they make a lot of different little portable scanners. Very frequently what I do is I keep my Doxy with me and I'll make any kind of sketch and I'll run it through there. It's like a cloud-supported scanner. And so you can run your little image through there and then it's shared up in the cloud and you can use it on WebEx or things like that.
Glyphy is a good one.
Glyphy?
Yeah, it's you can actually, if you get the pro version, you can share digitally, and it's got.
Is it electronic drawing? Or
Yeah, it's not just a drawing, but you don't have to learn how to draw. They've got all kinds of things that let you use everything from architectural templates to circles and squares to. There's a bunch of practices on there with templates that from other people that share things that they're using. So.
Cool. So Glyphy is recommended. Here.
Is there a single resource or a couple resources that you can recommend to a startup that's currently doing a lot of these kind of user experience practices, but doesn't really have a real understanding of kind of where different practices kind of fall in, like what the trade-offs are?
Resources for learning more about lean user experience. Yeah. The Luxor site, luxr.co. We have a lot of free resources up there, and we have a blog. And then you could also follow at LuxorCo. We very frequently tweet out things that we see in the world that we think are worth doing. You might also follow up either hash codes or follow Agile user experience design or Lean UX. And you'll find a lot of websites and blogs and other people like that. There's a couple of books that are coming out in the near future, but it's also new right now. Most of this good information is in blogs. I don't have a slide with UX design books. Oh, these books. Oh, these are not lean books. These are UX books, right? These are like the equivalent of the 4 Steps to the Epiphany. This is a huge treatise written by my friend Kim Goodwin. It's a 700-page book on how to do agency-style interaction design. It's a great book. It's a little heavyweight for startups. I'd say that Indy Young's book, Mental Models, is a good practice for startups. Contextual design is a little weighty. Learning from strangers is very actionable. If you read this, you'll learn how to have good conversations. Measuring the user experience has a lot of stuff in there. Observing the user experience. But these are all, these are professional UX books. This is like reading about Node, right? I mean, it's fairly technical stuff. Yes, please.
I work for a startup. We don't have a strong customer base yet.
you have a site that doesn't have a lot of users yet, and you're recommending using user tests and things like that. Is your product in consumer or enterprise? Is it the kind of thing that just regular people on the street would use? Okay, regular people who are into science. I haven't personally used UTest, so I can't recommend it or not. But I could sort of ask the group, do people here like UTest? Okay. What I like to do is I really like to show things to real people. And so people who are into science, I can imagine UCLA is here. You should be able to go to a cafeteria or something and find people who are into science. It doesn't seem like it would be that difficult to take an early version of your product or some rough sketches or a prototype or some comps and actually show it to real people, because then you can have a conversation. The downside of using sort of distance tools is you only learn about what you thought to ask about in advance. And when you're having a conversation with somebody, you can suddenly spontaneously go, oh, can you tell me why you did that? What do you expect that this would do here? And it leads you in whole new directions that you wouldn't have been able to go with a more formalized testing. Over here.
Once you find a user, do you kind of recommend that you find new users as you go through the process, or do you kind of the user base?
What I like to say is when you can predict what the user's going to say, get a new user. They're good until you can begin to predict what they're going to say. Then they're used up, got to get another one. Yes.
So once you've gone out and talked to customers and you have people's head nodding, and you have an idea, what are some of the first experiments that you would run right after you have that head nodding, specifically relating to the product in an online sense?
Does your product, does it exist yet, or is it still an idea?
It's still an idea.
Okay, then I would say that the sooner you can externalize and give them something to respond to, even if it's a paper prototype or if it's some high-resolution comps printed on paper, then typically the format that I recommend for a fast, easy customer development interview is you start out by collecting a little context. You don't talk about your product, you don't tell them about the idea, you just say, when do you take movies? And then they talk about their movie taking. Well, oh, they're a parent, or oh, they're a shredder, oh, they're a creative type. Okay, great. Then you say, tell me a story about when you stuff, or whatever. And then you're escaping from conjecture. You're telling you a real experience they've had. Then you pull out your product prototype and you say, okay, you know that thing you just told me about? We have a product. We can help you do that. Will you please show me how you would do that thing you just told me about using our product? And then you kind of stand back and you let them do it. And then at the very end, if they don't get it, then you can say, oh, well, we were thinking it would be like this. What can we do to get that across to you? And then that way, you're dealing less with conjecture, you're dealing less with leading. They're much more likely to give you information that is trustworthy. So I encourage you to get to something real as quickly as possible. And it doesn't have to be a whole working website. It can just be a piece of paper with something you've done in, I've done a whole lot of prototyping in PowerPoint in my life. You can do some pretty good looking stuff in PowerPoint with kind of things. I've been ignoring this side of the room. Anybody else over here in the front? What's the timing of sketching in an Agile sprint? Typically, have you bumped into the concept of spikes or sprint ahead concept? So there's just for the people who may not be familiar with it, there's a concept of things that can be done in line in the sprint, like what's the padding on something? Are we going to use this button? Are we going to use this button? How is the page going to be laid out? But sometimes when you're going to go through something that takes you across multiple screens or designing new screens, you need to kind of do a little bit of planning, like a spike beforehand. I recommend that you use the group sketching or design studio technique in the situation when you would be doing the design spike. And typically, you don't have to have the whole team do it. Just pull a little tiny cross-functional team. Somebody technical, somebody business, somebody designer product, and have a small group of people do it, and then share back what they come up with to the rest of the group. So you don't have to take the whole team off point to do it. It just is important that it be different perspectives. A guy that writes a lot about this stuff, like much more deeply than I do, is Todd Zaki Waterfall. He writes a lot about this stuff, and he has some good resources. Todd, T-O-D-D, Zaki, Z-A-K-I, Waterfall, W-A-R-F-E-L. More questions? In the front. Quick iterations. How do you get into the details without the specking? I think that my magic trick for that is to think at multiple levels of fidelity simultaneously. And I have another deck about that, not tonight, but what I try to think about is that you always need to work at the appropriate level of fidelity. Like pencil sketching is very low res, and working in Photoshop or Fireworks or something like that is very high res. I like to try to deconstruct and think about the bones of my interface, the tools and the data that are on the page as kind of being separate from the visual styles, the branding, colors, the gradients and things like that. And I try to look at my interface as having those two components as being separate. And I try to work with everybody else in my team so that we can kind of decompose or sketch down the high-res stuff to lower res so we all sort of understand what we're talking about. And working as long as possible at a gray box level or at a lower resolution, and then only doing like a key screen or two at high fidelity saves a lot of time. That would be my highest recommendation. Anybody else have advice about that? Saves a lot of money? Okay.
Balsamic's great for...
Balsamic, I'd agree. Balsamic's a good tool for low res. I'd agree with that.
Really, really good.
Axure is more expensive, but also a very good tool. My main complaint about Balsamic is you can't view the artifact unless you have Balsamic, and it kind of goes against my idea that tools have to be shared by the team, and you don't buy everybody a Balsamic license if they want to see. Right, but then why not use Visio or something else that's cheaper? So, I mean, I like Balsamic as a designer, I just don't feel it really supports my goals to be really collaborative and egalitarian, right? So over here and then over here, what?
Have you tried Google Drawing?
I haven't, I should.
It's actually cool because you can share and everybody can put notes.
Google
If you
Drawing.
do something to make it better.
Okay,
Might be too
cool.
much.
Over here? This is turning into an Agile talk. Cool. So benchmark for sprints and cycles. Generally speaking, whatever works for the team. Honestly, if you're doing like big, complex enterprise software, you might have like 3 sprints of 2 weeks each in an iteration. If you're doing something that's like consumer and greenfields and early stage, you might have 1 week sprints. I mean, it has to do with the complexity of the problem domain and the life cycle of the product. So I don't have like a packed answer for that one. Back here.
What's your experience with A/B testing on iOS apps?
A/B testing on iOS apps, 0.
Has anybody really done successful A/B testing on an iOS app and got through the App Store approval? Has anybody done A/B testing on iOS?
The question is, has anybody done successful A/B testing and got through the iOS store? Pete.
Yeah, I mean, it's very, very difficult to do any kind of A/B testing. I mean, you could A/B test things like an algorithm that does a recommendation engine or something like that.
Why not do it through like the testbed apps? I mean, why do you have to do it through the store?
There are apps you can deploy up to what, 100?
Exactly,
100
just do a sample size, just deploy it to 50 and 50 or something like that.
You'd have to do it in like
but you don't get a real sample of users. Because if you, seriously, right? Because if you just have only 100 accounts, so it's the same 100 people, it's all tied to the UDID, it's just an item.
Well,
So,
I guess the idea is it's harder to get discrete feedback when you're testing a larger and more complicated thing. So I think that A/B testing works really best when you're testing really subtle, granular things, and you don't really need a huge sample size in order to get a signal. You just want to know whether it's working or not. So Pete is really much more of an expert on this than I am. Do you want to take the mic and talk for a second?
No.
No. Moving on. Okay. Yes, here.
When testing your users, do you prefer to test them in a like a live setting, like using like metrics type of tools, or do you like to pull them aside when they're testing certain features that you're interviewing them?
I'm not sure why you consider KISS metrics a live testing tool?
Well, as they're in the middle of new features on your website, having like a pop-up box to ask specifically in the middle of a buying decision or a
Right. It's, okay. So what you're asking is, do I recommend instrumenting the interface in order to catch users when they're doing something?
Yes.
I think it's a really good technique. So for example, if you have, once again, it doesn't make any sense to instrument your interface crazily in every direction. You want to know what you're measuring and what you're trying to learn, right? So it doesn't make any sense to just be popping up dialogues and asking people to give you surveys and things like that. But if you have some path through the interface where like you have a lot of shopping cart abandonment or something like that, well, yeah, it can make really good sense because it's really super hard to get people in any kind of usability situation into that spot where they're going to have that problem. So yeah, for sure, it has its purpose. But the thing that I'm emphasizing is kind of at higher grain than a lot of things for A/B testing and Kissmetrics is talking about. I'm talking about knowing your user by meeting them face to face, sitting down with them, talking to them about who they are and what they're trying to do, and using that to really motivate the generation of ideas. So it's kind of like research for generative research, and then this a lot of stuff that we're talking about now is kind of like validation and testing, which is sort of more deeper and specialized. So,
I have two questions.
Yeah.
When interviewing users about their needs,
Mm-hmm.
I sometimes have problems having them talk about their needs. Users feel all of a sudden they're in the designer position and they start offering solutions as opposed to spending time describing their needs. How do you get them to talk about their needs more than offering design solutions? They're often not so good. And then I have a second.
So the first question is, when you're asking users to design your product, they kind of throw up their hands, or they just go to solutions, they go to features. Well, the same advice I gave to the gentleman on the other side of the room, that if they suggest a feature, say, okay, so if you have that feature, what would that allow you to do? And then the next thing out of their mouth would be a goal. And then I think that the most powerful tool we have is to get people to tell us stories, not about what they would do or what they'd like to do, but tell me about a time when you did this recently, and then what was easy about that, what was hard about it, what was painful, then they'll tell you what they're trying to do without getting into the features so much. And what was the second question?
The second question is, running a design studio is hard. How do you get a design studio to converge to some final design solution as opposed to turning it into a fight about who had the best idea?
Okay, so that's kind of an expert level question. This is somebody who's using the design studio technique. So I think that the big key to making design studio work is everybody sketches, then everybody presents, and when you're then giving feedback, it's not do you like it or don't you like it. It's this solves the problem well, or I don't see how it solves this problem. And you have to go in with a real clear idea of who's the user and what's the problem before you sketch, and then it rounds out the argument. Back here.
When you're in customer development, how do you effectively elicit the customer to tell you how they would find your service if they don't know that they're looking for it?
That's a tricky one. I think that the best I've ever done on that is to ask for related current stories. So let's say, for example, I'm doing some sort of a social recommendation having to do with dining, okay? So I'd ask them, so tell me about a time you ate at an unfamiliar restaurant. Okay, how did you hear about that restaurant? Oh, my friend told me. Great. How did your friend communicate that to you? Oh, they sent me an email or whatever. Or, you know, you have the conversation about what are they doing now? And it's very difficult to get people to accurately predict the future about what they might do or what they will, you know. But what you can do is you can collect information about, is this a person who is getting referrals and recommendations from their friends electronically? Are they the kind of person who has a small, tight group of friends and they only ever talk about things? I feel like that question's a little bit of a slippery slope because hiding in there is, I have an idea for how my product is going to work. How do I make people do this thing? And that's always a little slippery.
I mean, our product is a personal shopper for guys.
Okay.
Data-driven, send guys clothing because they hate shopping. right? And we've done a lot of customer development, a lot of stuff. We have customers who have revenue. Whenever we talk to customers, we ask the user stories, we have all of this on paper, but when it comes down to how would you find this?
Right. So this is a perfect situation for a hypothesis. So what you do is you sit and you ideate with your team, like what are all the different ways that people could learn about us? We could have advertisements in the newspaper. We could have sharp-dressed men traveling around town with sandwich boards on. We could do a Facebook campaign. You have crazy ideas, right? And then you quadrant them into like how feasible are they and how hard are they to test, right? So then what you're looking for is stuff that seems really like a good idea and really super easy to test. And then what you do is you make the littlest possible thing you can and you put it out there and you buy some AdWords or you do something and you drive some traffic to it and you measure it. Are you familiar with the concept of cohort analysis? Right? This is like a perfect situation where you have some crazy ideas, you set up some experiments, you drive some traffic, you measure it, and then you'll learn. Because your users won't be able to tell you that. They'll have to show you that.
Right, but you just have to be able to get a cohort that's statistically significant enough, such that it's. I mean, sandwich board is not going to be statistically significant.
Well, I mean, depending on where you are in your stage, right? You want to find your idea. You want to find your product market fit first, and then you want to scale. So the whole idea of statistically significant doesn't really matter when you're early stage. What you're trying to do is find some kind of a core of really passionately engaged users who are going to really value and understand your service and get it, and then you worry about the scaling later once you have something that catches.
And you just have to make sure that that core is big enough that it's sustainable over longer periods.
Right, there's a there. There's money in that market. What?
What's a big enough core?
I mean, are you making a lifestyle company, or are you trying to, flip, get acquired? I mean, it depends. That's a completely subjective question. What's big enough means what's big enough for your goals. Okay, so just two more. We're getting covered. Over here.
What do you think of designing?
What do I think of designing in the browser?
Yeah, is that a good idea or not?
Can you describe more about what you mean by that?
So instead of prototyping by drawing things out to paper, you go straight to HTML and CSS. And you actually literally build the block in the browser.
Well, I think that if you're making something that is going to be delivered in a browser and that it's similar to something that already exists and you maybe have some known patterns or things like that you're just kind of drawing on, like from a style guide or a library, that might not be a bad idea. However, if you're trying to come up with something that's really innovative and novel and different, and then I would always start on paper. So like, how much time do you have? Is it fitting into the context of something else that already exists? Is it brand new? So I mean, like many things, I don't think there's a lot of cases where I'd say that any technique is all good or all bad. It's all entirely contextual, and we have to use our judgment to decide. Okay, one more. Someone who hasn't asked a question. One more. Nobody wants to be last. Here, hang on.
In the ideation phases of design, and then coming up with design, can you give me a breakdown of how you would allocate like 20% here, 30% here in terms of?
In the ideation phases of design, how would I allocate time?
Or just like your reason. I mean, so going from the idea and how that drives design, and then designing whatever it might be, just that whole process.
I'm going to try to answer it. Let me try to reframe it first a little bit, right? Yeah. So are you currently working as an individual designer and you typically work by yourself?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think that one of the things that's going to happen is you start to work with startups and you start to work in a more collaborative, quick, visual way. You'll have less time to think about process, and you'll have more time to think about creating rituals or practices that the team is using. So for example, I like to think about kind of cycles. It's like we are thinking about what's the experiment we're going to run, and we're thinking about who's the user and what's the business metric we're trying to create and what features go in this thing, and then what's it going to look like, and who are we going to test it with, and how are we going to know that it's right. And then, people are all kind of simultaneously doing their activities, working towards this goal of making this experiment, validating the experiment. And sometimes that means we put it up and we just measure it with analytics, and sometimes it means we're also putting it in front of users and talking to them about it, getting feedback. And then everybody comes back and we decide, oh, double down or kill it, right? And then we do another experiment. So it's a whole lot less, I mean, as a designer, it's a whole lot less about having an idea and bringing it to fruition, and it's a whole lot more like being a chef in a kitchen and like just trying to get the plates out, right? It's a whole lot less like Martha Stewart and a lot more like a real kitchen. You know what I mean? It's like you're in it and working on it and reacting a lot more. Okay? So thank you all for your attention. I really appreciate it.